Hello and welcome to Sipz and Stories. My name is Elizabeth, and in today's video I will be doing my wrap-up catch-up. So unfortunately I have not had time to film a monthly wrap-up in quite some time since the holidays. Just a lot going on, school, work, travel, moving. But before I move forward with all of the amazing books for middle grade March, I did want to discuss some of these books that I've been reading recently. There's some real gems in this video today. So grab your favorite beverage as I discuss my wrap-up catch-up. So going back all the way to nonfiction November, I read so many books in nonfiction November that were excellent. I just never had the time to discuss them on this channel. The first one that really stood out for me was Come Fly the World, the jet age story of the women of Pan Am by Julia Cooke. So I first saw this on Goodreads. Like many people, I'm just fascinated with that cover. I love the glamour of the Pan Am stewardesses. I was a real fan of that show on ABC with Christina Ricci and Margaret Robbie. Fun show. And I think a lot of us are just fascinated with the glamour of the Pan Am stewardesses. The real story of their lives is amazing. A lot of these women were highly educated. Many of them went to grad school, world travelers, and it was a requirement with Pan Am that you had to have a college degree and speak 2 languages. So that alone really encouraged a lot of cool women to apply for the job. It also talks about the history of the Vietnam War. Pan Am's heyday, of course, was in the 1960s and the 1970s during Vietnam. And what I didn't realize was that Pan Am kind of acted like almost a civilian branch of the US military, flying a lot of these soldiers into Vietnam during the war and then ferrying the soldiers up to places like Hong Kong for a lot of those R&R flights as well. The book features several women that worked for Pan Am and just kind of profiles their lives and how it related to Pan Am. Each one of them was interesting. We had, I think Lynn was my favorite. She was a grad student that did not want to become a college professor, so she decided to spend some time traveling the world. I also really liked Tori. Tori was an attaché that worked in Paris and was just kind of sick of her desk job working for the UN, so she decided to also travel the world. And then it talks about a lot of the women were some of the first African-American stewardesses. It talks about them battling with their unions to get more rights for women, obviously in terms of better pay. A lot of people had to quit Pan Am at a certain age or if they got married. And so there was a lot of groundbreaking cases for that as well, which not only helped the stewardesses, but women working throughout America. Really fascinating history of that. And then the ending is really heartbreaking. It was about Operation Baby Boom, when they brought a lot of the Vietnamese orphans back to America, and it was kind of just a PR nightmare for America. Really interesting, that part of the book as well. So I highly recommend this one if you are like me, just fascinated with women's history and with the Pan Am stewardesses. Another great standout from nonfiction November was The House of Dreams, The Life of Ellen Montgomery by Liz Rosenberg. I first heard about this on Life Between Words channel, and like me, she is just a huge fan of all things Ellen Montgomery, Anne of Green Gables, Emily of New Moon, Pat of Silverbush. I think you could easily say that Ellen Montgomery is by far my favorite author, and just reading the history of her life was very interesting. I have read other biographies about Ellen Montgomery, including her autobiography, The Alpine Path, but you know, as they say, truth is stranger than fiction, and Ellen Montgomery, the trouble with an autobiography is sometimes the person is not telling the truth. And so in this, Liz Rosenberg really gets back into some of the nitty-gritty details that Ellen Montgomery never really admitted in her personal diaries and papers. Her family also recently came out, the Ellen Montgomery estate, that she did die by suicide. She battled depression, her and her husband, throughout her life, bipolar depression. And during the years of World War I, it was really tough for her. Her husband was suffering from depression. Her children were getting into a lot of trouble, and just the war itself really took a toll on Ellen Montgomery. So they do believe that she overdosed at that time. So I have to commend Liz Rosenberg for mentioning that, because It really is a head scratcher. I mean, how can one of our favorite authors, the person that loved life the most, who just wrote about all these amazing characters like Anne Shirley, about the nature, just a beautiful author. The fact that she also suffered from depression was interesting, and I commend Liz Rosenberg for bringing the truth to light. That being said, this book often gets marketed as a middle grade biography, but I really would not recommend this to any kids younger than about 12 or 13, just because of the subject matter. But again, a fascinating account of Ella Montgomery's life, and it is not all sad. I mean, it's really wonderful just about her history growing up in Prince Edward Island, and then when she became a newspaper reporter. I also love the scenes when her grandmother really fought for her to go to college as well. It does have a lot of heartwarming moments as well, but again, very tragic ending to her life. Another standout from NonFiction November was Hayley Mills' recent autobiography, Forever Young. This book came out last year, and when I saw it at the store, I knew I immediately had to have it because I am a huge Hayley Mills fan and a huge Disney buff. I would say that Pollyanna is probably my all-time favorite movie. I love those childhood classics like The Parent Trap and That Darn Cat and The Moon Spinners, which is based on a Mary Stewart novel, by the way. But it was so great to just read the history of Hayley's life and her time in Hollywood working with Walt Disney. She is currently one of the only people that is alive today. Hayley Mills is in her 70s, who can really give you a first-hand account of what it was like working with Walt Disney, just the fascination of him and just the genius of Walt Disney. And they just had this incredible bond. It was almost like a father-daughter relationship. After she finished each one of her movies for Walt Disney, he gave her a charm for her charm bracelet. So sweet. But Hayley Mills' real family was fascinating as well. She came from a very old Hollywood family, which I did not realize until I read this book. Her father is the very famous actor John Mills, another famous British actor, old Hollywood actor. If you are a Disney fan, you will probably recognize him from Swiss Family Robinson. He is the father in Swiss Family Robinson. Just her mother as well, famous playwright in London. So there are a lot of descriptions of just the life with her family, growing up in the UK, about a lot of the famous actors and actresses that they all personally knew, such as Laurence Olivier and Vivien Leigh. Really interesting if you love old Hollywood. And then again, just the history about her being on set with Disney in California, making all these amazing movies, working with all of these terrific actors. Excellent. It was like being a fly on the wall of those sets. I loved this so much. I almost wish it could have been like a documentary or a 2020 special. Hayley Mills has a great writing voice, a really tongue-in-cheek, funny sense of humor, and she gets very candid and honest towards the end of the book as well, because she was literally Pollyanna. She did have a difficult time transitioning from a childhood actor into a more serious adult actress. She actually married a very older man, and her parents were horrified. He was 30 years older than her, so she kind of gets into the details of that. Really interesting. And then there's just some funny moments as well. I would say my favorite scene is when she goes on a date with George Harrison during the height of Beatlemania. And so her and Paul McCartney and George Harrison and the girlfriends, they all go out on this group date, and they totally get separated from each other. Her and Paul McCartney's girlfriend, they get back to the hotel and all their clothes are torn because of all the crazy Beatles fans. So a really funny book. I enjoyed it so much. And again, if you are a fan of old Hollywood and Disney history, I think you will really like Hayley Mills' biography, Forever Young. Okie dokie, moving on to some books that I read during the holidays. These next few books are very heartwarming, cozy reads that just happen to be set during Christmas time. But Christmas was very minimal in all three of these books, so I do recommend them from any time of year, really. They're just really good books. The first one that I read was Women in Black by Madeleine St. John, and I do believe that I recommended this all the way back in my Holiday TBR in December. I did finish it mostly when I was on vacation in Miami. I had a great time reading this book, and this book is just the type of thing I love to read the most. It's a heartwarming, coming of age story about this group of women that work at a department store during the 1950s in Australia. It features this multi-generational cast of characters. We have a character who's very sophisticated from Europe, a housewife, a girl that is looking for love, and then we have the youngest character who has recently graduated from high school, and she's kind of in her gap year between high school and college, and she's just kind of learning about life with all of these women. I love this so much. The comedic writing in this is excellent. Everyone said that Madeleine St. John's writing was excellent. They were right. I cannot wait to go back and track down some of her other books. She's a Stanford grad, so just to kind of put that out there, I think she went to like Oxford and Stanford, and you can tell, even though this is a comedic novel, her writing is fantastic, really sharp and really witty. I loved this book so much. If you're a fan of the television show Mrs. Maisel, which has that new season on Amazon Prime that just came out, I do think you'll enjoy this. It's very similar to like that first season of Miss Maisel when she works at the department store. Love this book so much. Another cozy book I enjoyed during the holidays was Yours Cheerfully by A.J. Pearce. This is the follow-up to her first book, Dear Mrs. Bird, which was her debut novel. Again, this one was excellent. I just have to give a shout out to this special Waterstones edition, which I picked up. It was a little pricey with the shipping, but oh my gosh, it's so worth it. This is my first special Waterstones edition, but I can tell you it will not be my last. They're famous for being signed by the author, so A.J. Pearce, there she is. She signed this edition, fantastic. But what's really special about these books is the spray painted edges. And this one is adorable because the edges just kind of mimic that typewriter that is on the front cover. So cute, love this book. And the story itself was excellent. I would say that I still prefer just Dear Mrs. Bird. I thought that one was just a little more action-packed during the Blitz. If you're unfamiliar with Dear Mrs. Bird or Yours Cheerfully, it is about a young woman named Emmeline Lake, or Emmy Lake, whose dream in life is to become a famous newspaper reporter. But she is just starting off, so she ends up taking a job as an advice columnist for a women's magazine, and of course she gets in trouble. A lot of the scenes in the first book take place during the Blitz, so they're very bittersweet. But Emmy herself, she just has this amazing personality, very like keep on and carry on, kind of like British personality. Love her so much. And this one is really cute as well. Emmy is a little more sure of herself. She actually gets like a real newspaper assignment in this book to profile these women that work in a munitions factory during World War II. And while she's there, she gets in trouble because the women start complaining about some of the trouble they're having, like maternity leave and childcare. And a lot of them that have become widows recently because their husbands died on the front. So Emmy, being Emmy, gets a little too more involved than she needs to be. They end up staging this protest. It's absolutely adorable. The ending, I don't want to spoil it if you are not familiar with the first book, but it's very romantic and sweet at the end. I think we have a series on our hands now. I cannot wait till the next one that A.J. Pearce churns out, and hopefully she can write a few soon so we can turn this one into a TV show. Love this book so much. Another cozy classic, which I really enjoyed recently, was Rosamunde Pilcher's Winter Solstice. I mentioned this one again in my Winter TBR. A lot of you told me that it was your favorite Rosamunde Pilcher. Now that I've read it, I would have to agree. I think this one is absolutely terrific. I love Rosamunde Pilcher's writing. Again, her stories are very romantic and cozy. She usually features this multi-generational cast of characters. So in addition to getting the story of the young people, you also get the stories of the matriarch and then some of the young children. So I just love her characters. This one, again, switches from multiple perspectives. So every chapter is told from a different character's perspective. The main character is Elfrida Phipps. She is a retired actress in the theater, and she moves to the Cotswolds and she becomes friends with this family who's very gregarious and larger than life. But when tragedy strikes the family, she ends up really forming this connection with the father, Oscar, and the two of them go up to Scotland so Oscar can kind of recover from what happened to him. And while they're there, just a whole cast of characters ends up staying with them during the holidays. It's delightful. And you know Rosamunde Pilcher, of course she's gonna spend just as much time talking about the house and the food and the landscape as she is about the main characters. And she is also Scottish again, so most of her books are set in Scotland. Very cool and intriguing. A lot of scenes in London, of course. Just, again, one of my favorite Rosamunde Pilchers. Winter Solstice. At this time of year, I also happen to enjoy fantasy, especially kind of whimsical fairy tale type of retellings, fantasy. And I did mention this one, The 10,000 Doors of January, in my Winter TBR by Alix E. Harrow. I did finish it in January, yes. But again, that is just a geeky thing that I did. Feel free to read this any time of year because it is such a fun fantasy novel. It does remind me a lot of Erin Morgenstern's books, so if you are a fan of The Night Circus or Starless Sea, I think you will really like this one. It just has really great descriptive details, a lot of imagery, and just so much fun. Again, this one is about a young girl named January. January lives with this older gentleman named Mr. Locke, and he lives in this really fancy mansion in Vermont, and he is a collector of old antiques. And so January's father is kind of like this Indiana Jones type of character. So Mr. Locke sends her father all over the world to track down these antiques and bring them back for his collection. But as the story unfolds, you realize that there is more to Mr. Locke than meets the eye, and there is just a deeper relationship between him and January's father, and that January's father is actually searching for more than these antiques. I love this one so much, and because it's 10,000 doors, January does have this ability to go into multiple worlds. Every time she opens a door, she enters a different world, and you will see what she is looking for. Very beautiful story. I love this one. The writing was excellent, a little tongue-in-cheek, whimsical. The imagery was beautiful, all of these scenes throughout these parallel universes. I really enjoyed this one, and I think, again, this would make an excellent movie. The book that I read was a YA fantasy, Girl in the Tower by Katherine Arden. This is the follow-up book to Bear in the Nightingale, which I read last year, and I really enjoyed it. And I have to say, Girl in the Tower is even better. I think I enjoyed this one more because it's set in Moscow and Vasilisa is now a soldier. She disguises herself as a boy and then she teams up with her brother Sasha and her sister Olga in this book. If you're unfamiliar with this series, it's about this young woman named Vasilisa who does not want to get married. She doesn't want to stay at home. She wants to go on adventures, and she has this ability to communicate with some of these spirits and these demons and these otherworldly characters. And the main person that she talks to a lot is Morosco, who is the frost demon, kind of like Jack Frost. And he teaches her all about magic, and there is a little budding romance that develops between Vasilisa and Morosco. Really fun, whimsical book. The main thing I enjoy about this book is just Katherine Arden's writing. It is stunning. This book is mostly set in Russia. The first one is kind of set in the Russian wilderness. This second one again is set in Moscow. And then the third one, Winter Witch, I'm really not sure what happens in that book, but I am looking forward to it. Again, Russia is not everyone's favorite topic right now, but I do think this series and Katherine Arden's writing really represents the best of Russian history and Russian culture, so I do recommend it for that reason. I did listen to it on audiobook, which I recommend as well, just so you can hear the correct pronunciation of some of those Russian words and those names, which can be a little bit difficult. I really have been enjoying the Winternight trilogy, and it's a fantastic series. I cannot wait to read The Winter Witch next. And finally, the last book that I read recently was The Way Past Winter by Kiran, Millwood, Hargrave. This was also an excellent book, a really good one if you're fans of Bear and the Nightingale. This almost felt like a children's middle grade version of Bear and the Nightingale. Love this one so much. It's a children's fantasy. It is set somewhere foreign too. I mean, we really don't know where. I'm thinking Scandinavia or maybe Russia, I'm not sure. It's about 3 sisters. Let's see, Mila, Pippa, and Sana. And their mother has died, their father has abandoned them, and they all live in this cabin in the woods. And it has been perpetually winter for years and years. Spring has never returned to this forest or this village. And then one day this mysterious stranger shows up and he basically kidnaps their brother Oscar and a lot of the boys in the village. And so the sisters decide to go and find their brother. They end up teaming up with this wizard or this mage named Rune, who helps the sisters track down Oscar, and she finds out what happened to her family. It's a wonderful book, and I really enjoyed Kiran Millwood Hargrave's writing. I think this book did win some awards in the UK. I think it was maybe Blackwell's Book of the Year or Waterstones Children's Book of the Year. And you can really tell because the writing was fantastic. I do think it was better writing than Snow and Rose, which I read last year. So if you're a fan of children's fantasy, this is a nice one that both children and adults can read together. This would be a nice pick for middle grade March for the contemporary category as well. Really love this book. I cannot wait to see what Kiran Millwood Hargrave writes next. Thank you everyone for joining me for my wrap-up catch-up. Again, these are just some of the books that I've been reading recently, which I've really enjoyed. I can't recommend each one of these books highly enough. If you are a fan of nonfiction, of fantasy, of cozy reads, each one of these books was a real winner for me, and definitely at least a 4 or 5 star read. So stay tuned for middle grade March, which I will be filming next week. I have a lot of amazing recommendations for middle grade March as well. Cannot wait to talk about the children's books next. Thank you everyone, and have a great day.